Hello, everyone, and welcome to Hangouts with Visionary Leaders, intelligent and engaging discussions with visionaries, thought leaders, and change makers that open us to a new narrative for our future. And today, we're going to be talking about digital intimacy. And my guests are Yifat, Cohen, and Marc Gafni. I'm your host, Lisa Ingalls. I'm a visionary coach, an author, speaker, and consultant, and I help people who feel like something's just got to give to find their internal compass so that they can make decisions that help them gain momentum and awaken to their highest potential. You can find out more about me by visiting www.innerstatecoaching.com. While you're there, feel free to pick up my free report on how to create a radical breakthrough. It's a 5-step practice. So here's the thing. We have reached a new era of human possibility. Individual as well as collective leadership is critical as we navigate our way through old and outdated paradigms that no longer serve us towards moving towards an expanded life and a freer future. Humanity itself, I believe, is on a precipice of a new era of peace, of sustainability, of health, of prosperity. But the question is, will we as a collective choose to commit ourselves to peace and to declare an end to this type of struggle and disharmony? Will we as a collective turn the potential for possibility into probability? And how do we do this? These are the types of questions that we're bringing to the table in this show. We're interested in exploring innovative ideas through engaging discussion that can help us to birth a new humanity. So the purpose of the show is really to bring these critical topics into the field, into the space, and to see what arises from within the collective as new possibilities for our future. So I'm really excited today in this episode of Hangouts with Visionary Leaders to have two guests. Yifat Cohen, who is well known here in Google Plus as the G Plus go-to gal, Google Plus go-to gal. She's been on Google Plus since the beginning of time. Well, maybe not the beginning of time, but at least since the beginning of Google Plus, right? And she's done so much here in this space, and I have to say just personally that Yifat she was my first mentor here in Google Plus. She's the one that got me into Hangouts. She's the one that showed me everything. So I am so honored and happy to have her joining us in this discussion today. And my other guest is Marc Gafni. He's a visionary thinker, a philosopher, a wisdom teacher, and provocateur. He's the initiating thought leader together with Ken Wilber of World Spirituality based on integral principles and is the leading theorist and teacher of unique self-enlightenment. He's the author of 10 books, including Your Unique Self, The Radical Path to Personal Enlightenment, which was named #1 in spirituality in 2012. He's also a TED Talks presenter, and he, along with Yifat Cohen, they are together co-authoring a book called Digital Intimacy. Also joining us today is Leslie Freeman, the Director of Communications for the Center for Integral Wisdom, and she's here to join us in this conversation. So welcome, everybody, to the show. It's wonderful to have you here.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I want to remind everybody to put your comments, your questions into the stream below the Hangout. Join us in this discussion. We're really curious what you have to say, what you have to think about this idea of digital intimacy. And so for the panel here, I really just want to start with this idea of intimacy. Let's start with intimacy alone. What is intimacy? So, Marc, I'll let you go ahead and take the...
Yeah, thank you, Lisa, and welcome everyone. And our think tank, the Center for Integral Wisdom, which I initiated with Ken, you mentioned with John Mackey, who's the chair of Whole Foods, and Leslie is our inestimable director of communications, and Yifat is an esteemed board member. So we're all kind of in that, and your good friend Tanya is on our board as well. So what we're really looking at is what is the future of meaning, right? What's a shared language of meaning? We developed a think tank to really try and address that, and part of meaning in all of our lives is intimacy, right? 1,000 years ago, intimacy didn't exist as a category, right? That wasn't the goal. actually, even 150 years ago, right, the demarcation of a good marriage wasn't intimacy. Right? Today, right, intimacy is one of the kind of evolutionary emergence in terms of, do I have a good life? Do I have intimacy? Those two things are almost synonymous. And yet, as you so implicitly and beautifully point out, we're not quite sure what it means. Right? We know what it feels like. We can taste it when it's there, but it's not that easy to define. So let me just take a moment and try and kind of touch it, and feel into it. Intimacy has 4 core components. Intimacy means that I feel recognized. Right? To be in an intimate relationship is to be recognized. We all feel systematically misrecognized. So to be recognized is the first step, to be seen. But number 2, right, intimacy requires feeling not only am I recognized, but I'm addressed. I'm personally addressed by reality. I'm not an extra on the set. I have a role to play. Right? The song that I sing matters and is heard. The music that I play, its notes are resonant. And finally, and I'll stop here just in the beginning, number 3, and I said 4, but we'll get to the 4th later, but 3 is, not only does intimacy mean that I'm recognized, not only am I personally addressed, but intimacy involves always a transformation of identity. Right? Intimacy means there's a shared identity. Where there was a me, there's now a we. There's an emergent identity which is transformed. I move from my mere I-ness and I create the miracle of we space. And those are the 3 kind of the holy trinity of intimacy, just to begin and create kind of a framework for our conversation, which is really at the think tank what we're trying to do. We're trying to kind of, okay, what are the frameworks we're living in? So if we talk about intimacy, okay, so what are its 3 components and how do I taste them? How do I feel them? That's a beginning.
What I love about what you're saying, Marc, is that what you describe to me is a process. It's not something, it's not static. It's something that happens over time. These things of being seen, to be recognized, to be addressed, to have transformation, this indicates a process. It's not a thing.
That's right. It's a dynamic process that almost always works in that order. Right? And I've got to be first recognized, then I've got to actually, I'm more than recognized, I'm addressed. When I'm addressed, when I'm called, right, then I can actually engage in, right, I can trust you to engage in that transformation of identity, right, to up-level my consciousness and to become part of a larger context, part of a we. And that's what life's about. Right? That's what we're looking for. We want to be recognized. We want to be addressed. We want to have a role to play. We want to have a gift to give. And in giving of that gift, we want to actually evolve our consciousness. We want to actually transform our identity from a kind of skin-encapsulated, contracted, fearful, anxiety-ridden, slightly depressed, Prozac-bound ego, right, to a unique expression of love intelligence, giving my gifts, living my life, writing my poem, singing my song, right, in this larger evolutionary context. That transformation, is where joy lies, and not to be able to make it is tragic. And I just want to maybe hear now from Yifat and Leslie, and from you, Lisa, this is a particular day, and I know that you're never supposed to mark, when I did television in Israel, you're never supposed to mark a show with a particular date because they say it doesn't make it evergreen, but of course on a particular date, particular things happen. So I think we're all a little bit thinking this morning about Robin Williams, who just passed, last night, who kind of brought joy to so many of us. We loved him so much, and yet the tragedy of his life is he couldn't quite transform that identity. He couldn't quite get out of the blackness. He couldn't get out of the contraction, and the poignancy of that, of kind of that interior terror that he obviously lived through, that so many of us touch or taste at different times. So just kind of bowing in honor to the laughter that he brought us, and in depth to the pain that he felt, and wishing him well on his journey in the next stage.
Beautiful. Thank you for bringing that to the table and just addressing it and honoring it and allowing us to witness what a wonderful person. He brought a lot to so many of our lives. I know we don't need to talk about too much about him, but Nanu. Yifat, I'm going to put you on the spot here and have you sort of, what would you like to bring to the table in terms of intimacy? Its definition.
So my experience with intimacy is, and which is why we're writing Digital Intimacy, is I found my extended family, through Hangouts, and right, and I have very close friends here in Austin as well. But my extended family and my soulmates, really, I developed those relationships without actually meeting them face to face yet. Some of them I have afterwards, but the beginning started with this medium. And so, like Marc was saying, is that how do you move, from the square of just me in there and being an isolated username on a screen in some network, like a faceless person, if you will, a bluehead, and into the being seen online, but not being seen in a fake way, right? Being really seen. And one of the thoughts that jumps to my head in Google Plus that is not really seen in other mediums online is how I interviewed a lady, and I'm not going to mention her name because the story is not that great, but I interviewed a lady, and her images show her, as this young model, beautiful, well-dressed, amazing. Everybody wants to jump on the Hangout, and on the Hangout, she is her, late 40s self. And automatically people feel like she lied to them the entire time, right? Like the images that she put out there and who she really is didn't match. And so I love Hangouts and what they bring, like the realness of them, right? There's no hiding behind Hangouts unless you don't turn on your camera, but then there's no intimacy.
Mm.
Yeah, I agree. I've had that same experience with Hangouts as a coach, and that's the core work of what I do. And I think at the heart of what I do is connect and communicate, and that Hangouts have provided me a level of intimacy that I could never have had before when I was doing all of my calls by phone, right? Because I'm not able to see my client's facial expression when I'm doing a process with them. I'm not able to see their body, what moves in their body, and vice versa. There's that level of trust that is developed because of this medium of video, essentially.
And there's also some kind of a safety in it, right? Because we're still in our own home, still in our place that we're comfortable most with. And if anything ever goes wrong and we're all of a sudden, we're not feeling right, we just turn off the browser and we're back to our safety zone. Mm. So it's a very interesting balance of like, yeah, I'm being seen, but I'm still comfortable controlling what's happening around me.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Leslie, I'm wondering if you have anything you'd like to contribute to this piece?
Okay. I'm
there
now.
She is, Leslie.
Hi, thank you. It's nice to be joining you on this call. I'm Leslie, and I'm thinking back, just using some personal examples of times when I spent hours and hours in high school on the phone late at night with my friends. We'd fall asleep together on the phone, and those conversations lasted, 2, 3, 4 hours, and this went on for years. And we had some of our best, most deep connections that way. And we probably spent more time on the phone like that than we did in person. And yet, I feel like that was even more intimate in some ways than nowadays when we're on Skype, because it's so quick. It's just quick sound bites. But back then, it was these extended, long, intimate, yet phone conversations. Sometimes with friends across the country, but often just with friends I would see at school the next day. Nowadays, I feel like some of these conversations have gotten a lot shorter, especially with texting. And there's not so much of that arc of depth, I find, on my phone calls anymore.
Well, please, Lisa.
I was just going to say what you speak to, Leslie, makes me think of, there's different types of intimacy, right? There can be intellectual intimacy where we're sharing ideas and having discussions and debates and appreciating our similarities and our differences. There's experiential intimacy where we're collectively experiencing a play, or we go to the movies with a group of people and we may never even talk or have an intimate conversation with anybody, but we're having a group experience. And there's a level of intimacy that's created in that experiential intimacy. I think of Burning Man. When I go to like, oh, anybody you meet someone who's gone to Burning Man, you're like, oh my God, me too. It just comes to mind. And then emotional intimacy, which is so much what I think you speak to there of on the phone, Leslie, with your friends, like for hours and hours and falling asleep, and we've shared our feelings and we empathize and we have this awareness and understanding of our life situation. So I think that, that was just my piece there. But go ahead, Marc. You had something.
Yeah, no, thank you, and blessings on Burning Man. Yeah. So when we talk about intimacy, we're always talking about depth. Right, and that's what those three forms of intimacy share. Right, the opposite of the holy is the superficial. Right, and really, when we're looking for the sacred, right, we're looking for the intimate. Right, we're looking for depth. When we talk about the divine, about source, about God, and however we use that word, in the old world we used to talk about God as the infinity of power. Now I talk about God as the infinity of intimacy. Right, the infinity of intimacy, which is an entirely different, right, evocation. But intimacy always requires depth, and Leslie really brings us into the conversation that Yifat and I are deep in with so many people, which is, the shadow and the light of the digital invitation. So on the one hand, as Leslie really kind of points us to intuitively, the shadow, right? That is to say, it's easy to mistake pseudo-intimacy for intimacy, right? And pseudo-eros, for eros. And this distinction I make between pseudo-eros and eros, or pseudo-intimacy and intimacy, is core to our digital intimacy conversation that Yifat and I are having. So in other words, you can have all sorts of means of communication where you're virtually connected in 1,000 different ways, and yet you feel a loss of intimacy. Right? You're texting and you're Google Hangouting, right? And you're Skyping in every possible way, and you seem to be very, very connected, but actually you kind of remember back to that day when you were in summer camp, and you met the girl and you were 10 years old and you had gone roller skating together, and you lived in Columbus, Ohio, as I did when we visited the bungalow colony in the Catskills, and you're wondering, is she going to write you now here's the word, ready? Letter. Will she write you a letter? And oh my God, she does. She writes you a letter, and then she says she's going to write. Then you wait for the letter to come like 6 weeks, and then you wonder, well, what kind of stationery will it be on? Will it be on perfume stationery? Wow, it's perfumed. And then you get it, and it's got a little thing on it with a little kind of wax seal, and it says SWAC, sealed with a kiss. And you're 10 years old, ecstatic. And then you open the letter, right? And what an experience. So we went from letters just within our lifetime, because actually, in the history of culture is actually the history of forms of communication. We go from papyrus, right, to the to the printing press, and ultimately to kind of more advanced printing, and ultimately to being able to send letters. But just that's over thousands of years, right? In our lifetime, we've gone from the letter. Then I remember when fax machines started, the excitement of sending a fax, right, to the fax. Right, to email, which was kind of like mid-90s. We started using email, into late 90s, 2000, and we thought like email was the apex of possibility, and then we went to number 4, to texting, right? And then texting, there's a whole new thing now that everyone's doing called voxing the last couple of years, where you vox each other, right? And I mean, listening to a voicemail is like ancient. Who would ever listen to voicemail, right? And so we're kind of inundated with all these forms of communicating. We've got GIFs, which we can send people kind of these silent moving, pictures of us in any manner of poses and, more beautiful, more evocative or less evocative ways. And there's all these beautiful means, but actually all of them require depth. Because if they don't have depth, then actually we're just inundated with, kind of pseudo-eros, pseudo-intimacy, pseudo-connectivity, and we're using the multifaceted ways of connecting to actually replace the depth of authenticity, the depth of connection. And so the danger, the shadow, and I'll pass it to Yifat now, excuse me, I don't want to use a kind of a colloquial Israeli shorthand on the air, but I'll pass it to Yifat, right? The danger of digital intimacy is that the emphasis is on the digital, not the intimacy. And what we need to do is, what Yifat and I are committed to is restoring the intimacy to the digital. Right? That the digital is not just a means, but the digital opens up new channels of communication, and then we bring the fullness of our heart, right? The fullness of our heart blown open, the fullness of our vulnerability, the fullness of our authenticity, the fullness of our, and here's the big word, our intentionality, right? Our full intentionality, which is the only thing that ultimately yields depth. And that's the invitation to digital intimacy, and it's kind of like we have to take responsibility for our digital world, right? The digital world is happening, like it or not. You know, the singularity may or may not be upon us, right? But things are happening all over the place, and things are transforming. The world in 50 years is not going to be like the world is now. And if we don't take responsibility for the direction of this digital revolution, then it's going to happen without us, and it's going to lose, right, the core values of intimacy that we all hold so precious. Yeah, Yifat.
Yeah, I was like, where do I begin? I love what you're saying about the depth and the realm, and I think that with all the online mediums up to now, with Hangout, it was so easy to fake, right? It's so easy to just let me do SEO, backlinks, put fake pictures out there. I build the image that I want the world to see of me. And then in real life, I might be, you know, a miserable bum, but online, I look very successful. And now we got to a place with Hangouts and with deeper conversations and knowing people a little bit more that that fakeness doesn't work anymore. And so you're right, there's a fear. What of myself do I show to the world? How does the world accept me for me? What is my voice? And I think this is the biggest problem of people on Google+. It's like we don't have a voice. We've been so busy, you know, making up voices for ourselves. Like, who do we want to be seen online? And now in Google+, it doesn't work anymore. It's like nobody reacts to you unless they know who you are, unless they talk to you, and then your voice comes out. And so that's a big challenge. It's like, okay, you know what? The best example is that guy, the owner of was it the football or basketball, like the team where he was talking racially on a private conversation, and that came out to the web. What was that guy's name?
Right. I remember what you're talking about. The name escapes me. Right.
Right. And so it's like, okay, up until now, to the world, I appear to be this person. But now that we have all these means, all of a sudden my real self comes out, and there's a repercussion from that. So how do you, like, so do we have two ways of being, like the face that we want online and the one that is offline that we can hide, but really we can't hide that face anymore? So will that turn us into better people? Because if they find out how racist or selfish or bad I am, I'm not going to have friends anywhere anymore. I can't hide it. That's what I'm saying. I can't hide the black side of myself. So will that make humanity better because socially we're expecting you to be a better person?
Yeah. I mean, those are really, really important questions. And, you know, the flip side, and, you know, I want to really get to the gorgeous invitation of digital intimacy. But we'll just spend maybe a couple more minutes in the first half, so we'll end with the light, but we'll start with the shadow, you know, on the darkness, you know, the potential darkness, which is, you know, on the one hand, the digital world seems to invite transparency, and transparency seems to be, at first blush, right, the way to create intimacy, right? You know, it seems to create transparency, and Yifat is transparently telling me not to look at her, but to look at my camera, right, which I completely appreciate it, but she's doing it very gently. And here's the only trouble, you know, just to be transparent, you know, in this very moment. The problem with these things is that why couldn't Apple figure out how to actually see the person's face when you're looking at the camera? I mean, they're so good at everything, but we all know that when you look at the camera, you can't look at the person's face, which is kind of an intimate disconnect. But I completely appreciate the quandary here, and I will definitely work with that. Thank you, Yifat. So the paradox, right, of the web as well is that the nature of the way information is distributed is that it allows for distortion. For example, you can Google Hillary Clinton, and you'll get every manner. She committed murder with her husband. They murdered, you know, their counsel, Vince Foster, which was a major issue. It's all over the web. You know, I mean, there's every manner of kind of sexual accusation, violent accusation, tax fraud accusation, etc., none of which are controllable, even though they happen to be some of the most powerful people in the world. Why? because, right, a person can pretty much say anything they want on the web. They can get an offshore account, right? They can web optimize. And it used to be, if I met Lisa and she was friends with, my student and friend, T-Bird, right? I'd call T-Bird and say, hey, T-Bird, that person, Lisa, I can't believe it. She's she hates Jews. Did you know that? I don't care if she's Jewish or not, but she just does. And I spread around a rumor. And the worst thing I can do is I call Tanya, and she calls 10 other people, and everyone's saying, man, that's a terrible story. I can't believe that's true. It's obviously absurd, but I've spread it around, and I've infected 30 people in Lisa's circle. Big deal. Today, right, if I am, what was the word you used? What was the word you thought you used? A miserable bum. I think that was your description, right? If I'm a miserable bum, right, meaning, I just haven't made my life productive, and I'm sitting around, I've got nothing to do, I don't have a job, I'm good at web optimization, I can say anything I want about, Yifat or Leslie or Lisa or Marc. I can web optimize it onto your first page of Google, right? And then every single person that you're going to meet in your life who's going to meet you is going to know what I said, have no evaluation about the nature of our relationship. They won't know why. They don't want to know where I got my information from. And I can actually, right, severely affect intimacy in your life and how intimacy plays in your life, because I can block people from coming in. I can sow seeds of distrust. And in fact, Yale University Press just put out a major book a number of years ago by Harold Solov called The Future of Reputation, right, which is about this precise issue, right, the ability to actually affect reputation. I mean, there's a site online which is a neo-Nazi site which attacks me, and it's on the first page of my Google, right? It's a neo-Nazi site. You wouldn't know unless you checked it carefully, right? But there it is, right? And has me with a kind of gold star as a child of Holocaust survivors, and makes, preposterous accusations. And yet if someone's reading quickly, right, they see it, right? So there you go. You've got this very, very, very painful, complex issue in which actually the internet can violate intimacy, right, in a very profound way. And actually, it's very hard to create transparency because you actually can't share everything online. You can't share everything online because it affects a lot of people. It affects relationships. It affects marriages. It affects, all sorts of things. And actually, privacy sometimes is a value which is equal to transparency. In the kind of Northern California liberal world, we've made transparency our absolute value, which is, of course, idiocy, right? Right? Transparency lives in balance with privacy, right? And the web knows about anonymity, right? It knows about superficial transparency, right? It doesn't engage often in depth, right? It doesn't engage in a careful checking of all sides. It doesn't understand the needs for privacy, right? It doesn't evaluate information. It doesn't create appropriate hierarchies of sources of information in any genuinely intelligent way, right? And so the web is also problematic, right, in a very, very serious way. And only a person who's never encountered, just ask Bill Clinton or anyone who's ever encountered, right, the way attack plays on the web, right, actually knows that that's true. So these are the shadows of the web, and one of the things that Yifat and I want to kind of engage is how do we actually correct those shadows? How do we transform them? How do we actually create standards on the web? How do we create kind of levels of discernment? So digital intimacy is a great invitation, and we have to be willing to fearlessly, right, deal with the shadows and the problematics of this new frontier. We don't yet know how to govern it, right? We don't want formal regulation. Of course, the joy of the web is its lack of regulation. At the same time, right, the web also is a way of transmitting information that's distorted in the extreme, happens all the time, with enormous effect on people's lives. So how do we balance those issues, right, is one of the great social challenges, right, of creating that new humanity, right, Lisa, that you point towards. How do we actually create a genuinely safe and intimate space? Because we all know that the desideratum, right, the prerequisite for intimacy is trust and safety, right? So how do we create the trust and safety online that allows for intimacy? So I kind of put that out as a question, and of course we'll move, Lisa, for sure to the hugely positive invitations of digital intimacy, but to really be authentic in the conversation, we really want to put forth also the shadows and, the trap doors that we need to really watch out for in a real way. Does that make sense, everybody?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think in order to move into possibility, we have to be aware of the perils, as you were saying in the green room. It's like you have to be aware of what there is out there and be aware and not be steeped in it, but like, okay, these are what we have to deal with. And now, okay, here's possibility, and here's how we move to possibility. I think that's what you're saying.
Totally. Absolutely. Right on, sister. We're good.
Yeah.
We're good. We're good. We're good.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we thought, let's sort of move in that direction of inviting into the realm of possibility digital intimacy.
Well, I think, Mark, you just hit on the point of why Google Plus was created. Because prior to Google Plus, it was very easy to do everything that you're saying right now. And though it takes years for Google to sift through the data and figure out the knowledge graph and the connection and who's the authority and who isn't and who's just a spammer and who isn't. But the more we are engaging with Google Plus and its properties, the more Google knows who's the authority, who should I listen, and who should I rank. And that will help people, not, real people not be spammed by those who just want to bash their reputation. And a great example of that is one of the guys on Google Plus runs a social media company, and we all kind of know him. And I get a link from someone that I know on Google Plus that says, hey, do you know he's been sued by the state for embezzling money from Craigslist? And I'm like, oh my God, I know the guy. What? No way. And so I take that link and I go to like 5 people that I know that I think know him. And I'm like, hey guys, do you know that he's embezzling money? And they're like, yeah, it's someone trying to bash him. It's not real. And automatically that press release and that news don't mean anything to me because I have intimate real relationship with people who know the guy directly. So in your situation and in different way situations, it's like you have to know specifically who the person that you're talking about, right? If you're Googling the name and they're bashing. But there's so many different ways that people are finding us. And most of it is through the conversations that people are having with us or about us. And as the conversations are being built, it might take time, but as the conversations are being built and as we are more used to being part of a conversation and not just be a spectator, kind of like, the more involved we are, the more intimate we are, then it will be much harder to bash someone. And it will be much harder to fix a reputation after you screwed, enough people on the web that they were saying, don't work with that guy no matter how lovely he seems.
Right.
So
no, completely. In other words, Google Plus is a step in the right direction. And I think we both agree that it's a first step. And the Google algorithms, and this may be the last thing we'll talk about on the negative side, and we'll move to the positive side. What happens today is Google has algorithms, and the algorithms essentially evaluate, right, how to rank information. So just to give a particular example, right, let's say somebody accuses you of, I don't know, sleeping with goats, right? Not a good thing to do. Generally, sleeping with goats is not good. Okay, I mean, I'm, particularly for the goats, right? Now what happens is if you respond to that and you say, man, I don't sleep with goats, that's just not true. Then you post like 3 articles about, your kindness towards goats, right? So the way Google kind of evaluates that is they say, wow, this is an issue, right? Actually, by your responding to it, you flagged it to Google as an issue and you've linked your name, Marc Gafni goats. Oh, there's a connection between those two, right? And so then Google does this. Google actually ranks higher, right, the accusation. If you don't respond to it, and then, oh my God, I can't believe Gafni's sleeping with goats. I mean, that really pushes it over the line, man. That's unbelievable. I mean, I heard the thing about cats, you know what I mean, and and cows, but goats, that's just way too much. But you haven't responded to it. And people say, well, if he's not sleeping with goats, why didn't he respond? Because they don't understand that by responding to it, you actually rank, right, the negative accusation. So it's an enormously complex issue, right, which is you can't even respond, and if you do respond, you're actually what they call giving authority because you're linking those words in Google's algorithm. And actually, at least to date, the people that are making the Google algorithms, who are very nice people, with one of them I've had coffee, and they're very sweet and very beautiful, and they're also lacking in actually what I would call moral complexity. Meaning they're very, very good at algorithms, but paradoxically, the people that are actually making the algorithms don't actually have a nuanced or textured sense, right, of the social issues at play, right, and how you rank, which is actually tragic, right? And they're kind of sweet, young, geeky people, right, hanging out, in Google land, right, without actually a subtle and sophisticated sense, right, of the social texture and terrain, right, and the ethical complexities that are raised, right, by multiple scenarios. So actually the wrong people are making the algorithms because they're trained only in one quadrant of reality, which particularly is, right, the lower right, right, how to actually, what we would call in integral terms, the lower right of reality, how to kind of technically make technological connections, but they're very, very untrained in the interior dimensions. So, kind of pointing to the complexity, blessings, of course, and of course when I'm with the high priestess of Google Plus, far be it from me to say anything but full devotion and praise, right? Nonetheless, it's the beginning of the story. So let's shift now to the exciting and to the positive, right? And to begin to talk about.
Actually, Mark, you bring up such a great point, because as we move into wearable tech, right? If we have whether the Google Glass or the Oculus Rift, and we get an information about a person based on their digital life before we even get to know them, really, right? Let's say you just met a stranger. Look, right. What pops up is how many followers, how much engagement, all that stuff, and we make that judgment before we became intimate with that person.
Right.
Awesome.
Yeah, completely. And this is what we really need to look at. Yeah, completely. I mean, Google Glasses is like, let's not even go there right now. We'll get that. We're gonna have to have a chapter just in Google Glasses. The person who made the Google Glasses is actually coming to our summit, Success 3.0. Right, who just got came. We're excited to
hang out with Lisa next week about. So
awesome, fantastic. So let's talk about digital intimacy in positive terms. So let me mention 4 possibilities. 1, let's just start with dating sites. Right, dating sites are a form of digital intimacy. Right, dating sites have revolutionized, right, the way people meet each other, right, in the world, and expanded possibility in a radical way. I think all of us on this Google Plus know people who have gotten married, through the digital intimacy afforded, by the web. Lisa, do you know anyone like that? Do you know people who are kind of going out who met on the web?
I do know people that have met on the web and have gotten married.
Right. There we go. I mean, all of us. It's a and of course it makes sense. It used to be in order to meet someone, you had to go to the neighborhood mixer. And the neighborhood mixer worked if you were at the synagogue social or the church social or the Young Mormons League, wherever you happened to be, right? You went there till you were kind of through college, and then if you were really church affiliated, maybe you could, continue going. But pretty much today, when people aren't getting married, by and large, right, at college age, and then many people are not churched or synagogued or Buddhist centered or Islamed, right, with a local center afterwards. And the hub, with all due respect, isn't a place where you can really meet people. So where do you meet people? So you meet people kind of at parties, right? Complex and hard, right? Limited amount of people you can meet at a party. If you meet 3 interesting people at a party that you've managed to say hello to and exchanged 1 phone number, right, in 7 hours, in your 3rd party, you're doing good, sister, right? But here, all of a sudden, you go on a good dating site, the way a person decides to set up their profile. And my close friend is also studies with me, a great guy, Adam Gilad, right, has done really beautiful work and kind of pointing towards, right, this potential for digital intimacy, in the world of dating sites. So dating sites at their best have actually revolutionized intimacy, right, in many of the best ways. Of course, there's a lot. We could spend 4 hangouts just on dating sites, and we'll spend an entire chapter on dating sites in the book. But dating sites are one invitation. Let's just look at one more, and let me pass it to everyone else to look at other possibilities. Let me just look at one more possibility. 4 will take too long. We'll go for 2. Skype. So Lisa, you were talking about working with your clients, on the phone, and I'm sure you did Skype sessions, someplace somewhere. And I'm trying to keep not looking at you, right? Even though you're much more beautiful in the camera, but I'm going to try and kind of look at the camera. What can I do, right? So I'm looking at the camera here. So, when you do Skype's unbelievable in 5 different ways. 1, on Skype you've got the possibility of turning the camera on or off. That's dramatic, right? When you talk to someone, right? I can't talk to you and say no, I don't want to look at you. I want to just hear your voice. That's weird. So on Skype you can move between voice and picture. Number 1. Number 2, you can add text. You can be talking, and then certain things you can punctuate with text. Right? Those possibilities of moving from voice to visual to text simply don't exist in real conversation, and no one's noticed. One of the things I started talking about a year ago in terms of digital intimacy, right, in many talks, is the potential for Skype. Right? Number three, Skype also allows for you to take the other person's perspective, because at Skype you've got a little box on the side which is how you look, just like Google Plus does. So I can look down now and see this is what Lisa sees when she's looking at Marc, and Lisa can look down and say, wow, this is how Marc sees Lisa in this moment. So from a particular way, Lisa's able to take Marc's perspective, right, which was simply impossible before, right, in a very, very deep way. So Skype allows for, and finally, Skype creates a frame. And a frame, right, Lisa's now in a frame, Yifat's in a frame. A frame creates the subtlety of intimacy, right? And we actually call it in Vedanta and Hinduism, we call it subtle energy, right? There's a subtle energy that actually exists paradoxically through the virtual world that often doesn't exist in person. Because in person, the energy is diffused. You're in what the Hindu Vedanta calls kind of the gross energy, gross not in a negative way, but in the kind of the grossness of physicality, right? And then you move to subtle energy. So online, there's subtle energy. There's a kind of eros online. There's a subtlety. There's a subtle energy online, which is an actual quality, right, of energy, which actually is not available in the same way face-to-face. So Skype gives you subtle energy, 1. It gives you the focus of a frame, 2. 3, it allows you to move from voice, right, to face, 3. 4, it allows you to introduce text, right? 5, right, it allows you to take the perspective of another. Those are 5 principles of digital intimacy in Skype. And also we hear about people's complaining about Skype. Oh, Skype's so difficult. So people are pointing to the shadow, right? Oh, Skype's so difficult, but no one's actually completely turned this fate into destiny and said, oh, actually, what are the opportunities, the invitations in Skype? So if you go online, you will see like long, 4,000 comments of the problems about Skype. Okay, we understand that. There are challenges to digital intimacy, but we just offered 5 dramatic, revolutionary insights on how to take Skype and actually transform it, right, to a medium that invites digital intimacy in a way that a general face-to-face, in-person conversation actually can't do.
And I actually have one to add. I love everything that you're saying here. I'm so along with it. And I think Yifat will totally get this one, is with all of my clients now that I'm doing my Google Hangouts with, and I'm recording all of our sessions, what this technology now allows me to do is, as part of homework, oftentimes for my clients, I ask them to rewatch our session together and watch themselves from the observer perspective going through their transformational process, which allows them to have an even deeper level of process with the work that we're doing together, because now they can be the observer of themselves going through a process. You couldn't do this before.
That's great. That's fantastic. That's completely
so that
great.
Maybe would add one more to your points.
No, that's complete. Actually, 2 things you're adding, really, and I love it. Right. One is that you can actually record it and just listen to it. You can hear it. But number 2 is when you then watch it. That's number 6. Number 7 is you can record it and see it. And when you see it, you can not only take the other. You're expanding on the issue of perspective. Essentially, you can not only take the other person's perspective for a minute, you can actually then go into the conversation and replay the conversation from the other person's perspective completely.
Right.
So we're going to definitely add that in, right, to our principles, and credit you, Lisa. That's fantastic. Okay. But it begins to open up this whole new space, doesn't it? Right, and how we actually, right, understand these forms. And I can feel in the subtle energy, Leslie, having something to contribute to the conversation here.
Hey, thank you. I do. Can you all hear me?
We can.
Good. So this thing about Skype just came to me. Co-watching TV shows together. Like, how many people in, like, someone on the East Coast, someone on the West Coast, they love watching Mad Men, say, together. But they're separated, and it's their one thing they do on date night. They get together, they watch a show. So they both turn on Skype, they call each other, they both turn on their TVs or their online, Netflix, at the same moment press play, and they can sit there and co-watch together. Or
you want even something even more crazy? I do it with friends. Like, I want to watch a movie with them. We go to the theater, different theater in different states, and you watch on the phone, and you watch the same theater, even though the same movie in the theater at the same time, even though you're not physically at the same time. And then you can go, when the movie is over, you can even finish it with with a hangout and actually have, this is the craziest thing, right? Imagine you're sitting in a restaurant by yourself, having a hangout with someone in a different location and sharing, you know, experiences about the movie you just saw separately but together.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, and to build on it is, say you're in another country where you can't access your Netflix, so your friend turns on their Netflix in the States, watches a movie, you get on Skype, you screen share the movie to them in another country, so you can both watch through Skype this thing together.
Now that's fantastic, Leslie and Yifat. Now let's look at the shadow of it at the same time, okay? Right? So, for example, one of the dramatic shifts in kind of cultural topographies today is how immigrants integrate into their larger new environment. So it used to be when you immigrated to a new place, right, you acclimated and became part of that new culture within one generation, usually within 5 years. The reason is because you had nobody else to talk to, right? In other words, right, you were in Austin, Texas, right, and you came over, you know, from Singapore, right, and you know, the ability to actually kind of maintain connection to Singapore was tenuous at best, so you engaged Austin. What's happening today is, in its shadow form, is because immigrants are able to maintain connection with their roots, which is beautiful, that by itself is beautiful, what's happening is they're not actually integrating, right, into the larger populations. And of course, the examples you just gave were perfect, right? Instead of actually having to make friends, right, in, you know, Nevada City, right, and, you know, and there might be 3 people in Nevada City you could create a genuine relationship with, and you'd have to search them out, and you'd have to go to church and, you know, stop by the local club and, you know, make friends, and you'd have to really reach out into the community and spend money and, you know, jolt the economy, right, and create interactions, which actually is part of the health, right, of an economic system and a social system. Now what you get to do is you get to stay insular, right, with your, you know, friends by watching, you know, a movie together in different states. So on the one hand, there's an enormous positive to it, but what often happens is the techno-optimists, right, fail to look at kind of what I would call the broader social economic pattern structure picture, and it also blocks intimacy. So we need to be really, really aware, right, because again, paradoxically, what happened was, you know, the people who kind of made the moves, and you know, I'm very close friends with many of them, and I'm sure all of us on the phone are. We all have close relationships with kind of some of the key people in the last 20 years. And when I talk to them about the effect of their moves, you know, major founders of major companies, you know, and you think that they were thinking about it, they had no clue. It was the last thing on their mind. They were actually just, you know, engaged in this kind of childlike simplicity and naivete with the delight of creating new possibility without really any thought, right, about the social implications, which is fine, right, for kind of the first movement. Right, but now we've got to actually it's now our responsibility to actually invest this with direction, with meaning, with purpose, right, with awareness, with consciousness, right? Now we need to go from an unconscious digital world, right, not to a heavy digital world. We want to maintain the freedom, the spontaneity, the playfulness, the light part of it, and, right, a sense of consciousness, right? Where are we going? What's this about? What's the impact, right? You know, what's the trade-off involved in every calculus of digital intimacy? And that's the new conversation that Yifat and I are trying to convene, which really barely happening, and it's now just beginning. We're just finding it, and it's exciting and it's important. Yifat, we can hear you there. We can hear you thinking.
You know, it's very interesting because it's again, when you get back to defining intimacy, right? It's being seen. Does it have to be seen by your local community, or can you just continue being seen by the people at home and the ones you're comfortable with? You know, right. Like, do you have to be integrated? I mean, what is it, New York, you have Little China and Little Italy and all that stuff. So there's, in a way, you know, we're connecting cultures here, and some of it is going to disappear just because we are now an international crowd getting to know different cultures and behaving with them, right? And so is that a good thing, or do we want to keep Little Italy and enjoy the little, you know?
Well, the question, I think that's a beautiful way to say it. I mean, that's fantastic. And the question is, how do we balance both, right? In the 60s, in the 70s, right, you know, there was lots of talk about the melting pot. You know, America was the melting pot. And then then ethnicity began to rise again. We actually realized actually it's not a melting pot. Actually there's Little Italy and there's Chinatown, right? And there's, and we began to realize, wow, there's actually value in a kind of multicultural retention of deep ties. And certainly, right, as someone who practices Orthodox Judaism, right, in my own practice, I retain, old and deep ties to a 3,000-year-old lineage. So, I'm all about that. And here's the and that's where the dialectical tension, right, has to come into play, which is, and I want to integrate with my community, right, and I want to have a shared vision with that community, and I don't want to cloister, and I don't want to ghettoize. So how do I actually move out of, and the word you used, Yifat, so beautifully was comfortable, right? So I want to kind of make a distinction between comfort and pleasure, right? We think that the opposite of pain is pleasure, but the opposite of pain is actually comfort, right? I avoid pain, I get comfortable, but I never get to pleasure, right? Because pleasure actually always involves, right, the optimum level of discomfort, right? And what the digital world can allow is for me to actually just stay in my comfort, as Pink Floyd said back in the day, and become comfortably numb, right? You remember in our biblical background there was that gentleman named Mr. Comfort, Noah, and his name is Mr. Comfort. The world's getting destroyed. He's building a little ark, and he's kind of getting comfortable in the ark as the world's getting destroyed, and his name Noah means comfort. So I think one of the tensions here is how do I actually get out of my comfort zones in the way that's appropriate, and how, as you say so beautifully, Yifat, how do I retain my comfort in the place where it's really important, and what's the relationship between those two? Is that a fair way to say it?
Yeah, perfect.
Fantastic.
It came to in the latest event that I just came back with Eben, there were a bunch of 400 people from all over the world, and after one of the speakers finished speaking, there was a gathering around that speaker, and one lady came out. I was like really on the outside, and one lady came out and said, "How rude are these people? I was standing here, there's a line, and then they just gathered in and they just interfere." And I was like, well, you have to remember that most of us here are not Americans. Lines only happen in America. In the rest of the world, we jump in. She's like, what? Really? Why? So it's very interesting. It's like, the online and offline, we have these cultures, and it's like, how do we come together and stay ourselves and connect?
And create intimacy.
And
right.
I'll add just my little part to that, creating intimacy, and the comfort piece for me around being able to use Google Plus and Google Hangouts has opened doors to me that were not there before, that just weren't, it wasn't going to be possible. I am a mom. My daughter lives in Los Gatos, which is 60 miles away from me in Oakland. I have to drive a lot. My schedule is busy. I'm doing all these things. And to go to meet other colleagues and drive in the Bay Area,
oh my God.
You know what it's like to drive in the Bay Area. It's really hard. And it was stifling me and my business growth to think that I could do it all without making relationships online. When I got to Google Plus and to using Hangouts, I now have an international base of colleagues and friends that I never would have imagined that I could have had. People that I talk to on a regular basis that live in, Australia and Ireland and England and all of these places. It's like, oh my gosh, I would have never been able to drive my car to go see you, let alone go see my daughter 50% of the time and bring her up to Oakland. So just that piece of the comfort, it has been the way it has been very comfortable for me, but it was out of necessity in getting myself out there and doing my work in the world.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. And I mean, even us meeting in this moment, right? Tanya invited you to Dharma parties, right? You couldn't quite make it out, right? I now remember actually hearing your name, and I now kind of remember someone hearing your name from Tanya, which I didn't put two and two together until like a couple of minutes ago, right? And here we are, right? Through Yifat, right? Who I met through my friend Evan, right? Who's now on our board, and and Leslie, right? And so here we are, right? Creating this little evolutionary community, right? In this beautiful space that you've created, Lisa, right? And it's engendered, right, by Google Plus, and we actually have a sense. At least I'll speak for myself. I have a sense of having gotten to, feel into your quality a little bit, right? Like we haven't gotten to talk we haven't sat, in a restaurant and talked for 4 hours, but I can actually feel, as the Kabbalists say, I can taste. We can taste a person's essence. I can taste, your beauty, your depth, the subtle energy in a way that, actually wouldn't have happened if we were together with 150 people at a Dharma party. And I hope you come to the next one.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I know we're getting a lot of comments, you guys,
Please.
in the stream and my comment tracker. I want to apologize to everybody out there making comments. The comment tracker on my end is not allowing me to pop up your comments. So we're seeing your comments. Yifat has been awesome with going in there and talking. I just want to shout out to Kristen Drysdale for being here, Robin Holland, Bakik Patar, I hope I said your name right, Cap Schreier, Dave Moore, all of you guys in on the conversation, and we'll be sure that we go in there and comment after the fact. I just wanted to give a shout out and say thank you to everybody in the community. And as we're wrapping up, I just want to pass it back to Marc and Yifat and Leslie, if you'd like to just give some final words and let us know more about the book if you want. I'm just going to hand it over.
Leslie, any last comments from you? Back from Slovenia?
Yeah, right. Just back from my international travels, and delighted. Thank you. It's so good to meet you. And actually realized we already had sort of met through circles in California, and here we are digitally brought together completely unexpectedly. Thank you for having me today.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Yifat.
Just that, the questions the comments that are happening in the stream, we're talking about trust and intimacy, and whether you can have intimacy without trust or trust without intimacy. So just for the record, guys, you can have trust without intimacy. You cannot have intimacy without trust. That's my opinion. So back to you.
Yeah, and I want to kind of let's finish that with a distinction. And Yifat and we're going to transcribe all of these Google Hangouts because they're all part of the book. So let me make a distinction between two kinds of intimacy. We can end there, between what we might call occasional, or let's call it sustained intimacy, is one form of intimacy, right? And occasional intimacy, right? Or kind of, so you can have a one-time intimate experience with someone. When I'm saying intimate, I mean it not as a sexual experience. I mean it as an emotional experience. You can have a one-time emotional experience which is genuinely intimate, right? And then you betray the intimacy, right? That's right. And then you betray the intimacy, right? So you can have that kind of intimacy, right, which exists. It's genuine intimacy. What requires trust is sustained intimacy. And often what happens is you have people who, let's say, we're in a relationship. Everyone knows that when people break up from a relationship, they've got about a year of this very strange gray zone where the rules are completely unclear about exactly what's supposed to happen or what's not, and who's doing what with who, how, and when, and you move in and out of intimate space. So it's actually genuine intimacy, but it's not sustainable. Right? So I think to bring the ethic of sustainability to the ethic of intimacy, right, is a good interpenetration. For sustained intimacy, right, we absolutely require trust, right? And of course, ultimately, my belief is that it's sustained intimacy that's ultimately genuine. Right, because when you move from, and maybe I just got the word. Let's distinguish between episodic intimacy and sustained intimacy. Those are the right words. Episodic intimacy and sustained intimacy. That's the distinction I want to draw. Episodic intimacy doesn't require trust, right, or not kind of a depth of trust, and sustained intimacy does. And ultimately, in an appropriate hierarchy, I think we all know that sustained intimacy, right, is ultimately what we're looking for. Digital intimacy. Lisa, thank you so much. Right, for hosting us with such grace and love. We're just deeply delighted to be in your space.
Oh, thank you so much for being here. And before I sign off here, can each of the three of you let our viewers know how to get a hold of you, how to find out more about you, all that good stuff? Marc, go for it.
Well, Leslie runs my communication world more effective than I do. So Leslie, how do people get in touch with me?
You can visit our website, which is the Center for Integral Wisdom, at www.ievolve.org, and you can find my email address there, which is Leslie at Center for. Well, let's.
I'm not sure that was who the world.
Is there a way we can post this on?
Yes, we can put it in the comments. Yes.
That's what we'll do here.
Excellent. Yifat.
On Google Plus, guys, gplusgotogal.com and on Google Plus. Love to talk to you. Thank you so much, Lisa.
Absolutely.
Awesome. And Leslie, also point people to where they can find us in Google Plus, love. Right? Does that make sense?
Perfect, yeah.
Yifat's kind of got us all Google Plus up. Let's Google Plus it.
Yeah, we'll get everybody, we'll put all of that in the comments. If you have not circled these 3 wonderful people, what are you doing? Like I said, so many comments in the stream, and we'll get to your comments. Thank you so much, everyone, for this dialogue, this discussion, very important stuff. And just as a quick reminder, you can get in touch with me, find out more about my programs and services at www.innerstatecoaching.com. And we'll see you all next time.